Hi, this is Mark from LongIslandWatch.com, and welcome to another episode of Watch and Learn. Today, I wanted to get kind of down to basics again and discuss maybe a dozen or a little more than a dozen or so different watch terms that you might come across in the watch shopping process. You might hear people talking about, and you may wonder, what do they mean? Some of them extremely basic, some of them maybe a bit more not so basic. So what I've gathered here today is a bunch of watches, some from my personal collection, some from the store, to kind of give you an example or, kind of give a talking point for each thing I'm going to talk about. So the first thing I want to talk about is when we talk about the watch case. Yeah, it sounds very simple, but what does the case mean? Well, the case of a watch, and I don't know, I think this is from a Diavis, I think. Yeah, it's got a helium escape valve in it. This is a watch case. It's got the crystal on it, so imagine the crystal's not here. And it's the case. It's the basic building block. It's the thing that the dial movement hands go into and the case back screws onto. So this is your watch case. Very simple, obviously. You can look at the watch now, okay, oh, that's what the case is. It's everything, basically it's everything but the watch and the bracelet, right? The next thing that we'll talk about, or you'll hear people talk about, again, very basic, is the crown. Here's the crown of the watch. The crown is the thing that I hear people intermingle crown and bezel often. So the crown is the thing that you use to set the time, wind the watch, day and date. And when it's not in the watch, I actually have a couple here from a parts job. There, excuse me, that's the crown. You can see it there. And it's got a little threaded area right there that you insert this little metal post into. And that makes a crown and stem. And that is inserted into the movement so that you can adjust the movement, wind it, everything else that you might need to do. Bezel. So the crown and the bezel, like I said, people confuse them. This is the bezel, the thing that turns on the outside of the watch. It can be, 0 to 60. It can be 0 to 12. It can go in this direction, numbering up, or it can go in this direction, numbering up, whatever, it doesn't matter. This is a bezel. Unidirectional means it spins only in one direction. This is a Zinn. It's got a bidirectional bezel. It goes in both directions. But generally, your typical, let's see what I got here. Oh, no, this is also a bidirectional. I don't have any unis here, which is kind of ironic. Wait a second, no, I do. There's a Seiko hanging out over here. This is a unidirectional. It only spins counterclockwise, does not spin clockwise. That is a unidirectional bezel. Lugs. What are lugs? Lugs are the things here that the strap attaches to. That's all they are. When people talk about lug width, they're talking about the distance between the lugs that the strap goes into. So if the lug width is 20 millimeters, then you need a strap that's 20 millimeters. And then the lug to, what I call tip to tip, is what people call lug to lug. That's the distance from here to here. Sometimes it's a good measurement to give you an idea of how it's going to lay on your wrist. Now, you might say, oh, well, it's the case. You call them lugs, the case. Well, when watches came out, lugs were not part of the case. They were actually separate pieces that were inserted and screwed into the case, eventually brazed into the case, and pretty much now on almost every watch, they are actually part of the case and machined in to be part of the case. And then all those things comprise what we call the head. The head is the watch without the bracelet or strap. So this is a head, this without the strap, that's the head. Everything but the wrist attachment. So that's an overview of the outside of a watch. And then we start going to the inside. So you hear people talk about watch movements, right? The thing that's inside. I have one here. I don't know what this is from. It used to have 3 hands, but it's been sitting here for a long time. It's lost hands. It's lost a lot of things. It's an automatic self-winding movement. I've gone over automatic self-winding movements and a lot of other Watch and Learns. A lot of these terms I'm going over, you can check out the archives for Watch and Learn, and you'll see I talk about them all in detail. But a movement is also sometimes referred to as a caliber. Just a way that we try to confuse you. We call the same thing more than one thing. So you may hear Ulysse Nardin caliber, UN 26, and it just means that's their movement designation. So that is what that means. I always, in every video at least, I try to talk about hacking I did a whole video on hacking. What does hacking mean? Hacking is a horrendous term. It sounds disgusting. See the seconds hand moving on the dial? When I pull the crown out to set the time, the seconds hand stops. That is called hacking. There's a hacking lever in the movement that prevents the balance from moving. It's used for, accurately setting the time on the watch, which for me, again, ironic on an automatic or mechanical where it's going to be off by a few seconds per day regardless. That's hacking. The next one is Joules. I guess I can bring up this movement. Watch and Learn, maybe number 3 or so, was all about Joules, so you should check it out. Let me zoom in on this guy. On Watch and Learn number 3, I went over Joules like crazy, under the microscope and everything. It was really good. You should check it out. But Joules are the red dots that you see in movements. Like here's a cap Joule right here on the balance wheel. There's probably, my thumb is holding the rotor. Let's see if we can find another one. We should be able to. If not, I'll pick up another watch. Here's one right here. There's another. See that red dot? And there's a metal stem in the middle. That's the pivot for the gear is coming through, and it rotates in the Joule. Joules are used to reduce friction in a watch movement. Your typical pallet fork movement escapement has usually at least 17 joules is what you need. More joules does not necessarily mean better. Joule counts do increase as you add complications, which we'll get into in a moment. But joules basically take the friction out of a watch, and they're pretty cool. You should check them out. Let's get into, before we get into complications and stuff, there's one other thing I want to go over. It's called Guilloche, whatever you want to call it. Let me zoom in. This is actually one of my wife's watches. I want to see if I can get it to focus on the dial without going nuts. And I hope you can see it. But the dial, as I hold the light, see the dial has a pattern to it. Like look over here, see this strip of light going to the left? There's a wave pattern in the dial. There you go. I think you can see it now. That, in the olden days of watchmaking, was created by what's called a rose engine, which is kind of like a lathe, kind of like a key copying machine, kind of like a machine that reduces things by scale. It does a lot of different things, but it creates patterns in dials. I doubt this was turned on a rose engine, being an inexpensive Seiko. It's more than likely a stamped dial. I've seen a rose engine in use. It's amazing. The people that use them are absolute craftsmen, but that is what that means. Two other things you may hear about are, I think it's on this one actually. See that striping on the back? These vertical stripes. They're kind of like Geneva Stripes, obviously being a Chinese watch. These are not Geneva Stripes, but that's what Geneva Stripes are. I don't have a watch with perlage. I thought I did, but maybe it's, I don't know. I looked at the back of one watch. I didn't see any. Perlage would be round dots that look like pearls, maybe about that big, and they're created with an end mill, and they touch an end mill off to the surface. Just a cool finishing effect, nothing of extreme importance. Again, just making the watch look more beautiful. Let's get into, the last thing we're going to discuss, I should say, is complications. So what is a complication? Well, a complication is anything added to a watch besides, minutes, hours, and seconds hands. So obviously a date is a very simple complication. It's probably even a stretch to call it a complication, but we will. So let's get into maybe some cooler complications. So here is a sin. I think it's, this one doesn't have a seconds hand. Isn't that funny? So I don't know if it's running, so I'm going to wind it. This is my sin. It has a 2-eye chronograph running elapsed chronograph seconds is the tall hand, and there's elapsed minutes underneath, and then there's elapsed hours down here. So a chronograph measures elapsed time. You start it with one button, and after a minute, that index will move over one dot, and then the elapsed hours, which is under the hour hand, will eventually make it around. This is a 12-hour totalizing chronograph. You stop it, and you can reset it. And they come in quartz, they come in autos, every way, shape, or form. And you can hear me clicking it very heavy. That's how a mechanical chronograph sounds. Now, before I move on to the next one, I just want to make a point. Don't confuse chronograph with chronometer. and see superlative chronometer, officially certified. Chronometer is a totally different term. They mean totally different things. Chronographs are used to measure time. I mean, I guess a chronometer was used to measure time, but not in a start-stop elapsed fashion. Chronometer, again, it was another watch and learn that I did. Chronometer basically means the watch tells time with good accuracy, roughly +6 to -4 seconds per day is what a chronometer means, a mechanical chronometer. There are quartz chronometers, which are highly more accurate. I showed that with my Breitling Aerospace video, but that is what a chronometer is. Chronometer, accurate time teller. Chronograph, measures elapsed time. Next complication, I like to use this watch because it's got it, is the GMT function. GMT stands for Greenwich Mean Time, and what it's evolved to mean is a watch that tells time in 2 different time zones. The way this watch works is kind of unique to other watches, which is why, and again, one of the other reasons I bought this years ago, because I love it. The GMT hand is this yellow hand. The regular arrow hand is this hand. When you pull the crown out 1 click, see that hand? It moves. You can move it 1 hour increments. And then when you don't want to use it, you just hide it under there, and now the watch is not a GMT anymore. I mean, it still is a GMT, right? Or what they call a UTC, Universal Coordinated Time. It's kind of flipped as a compromise between UTC and UCT. The French way of saying it, the English way of saying it is, there's a whole thing about it. It's actually pretty cool. GMT and UTC are almost the same within a couple of microseconds. And maybe that's another watch and learn. But that's the GMT hand, so if I wanted to set it 2 hours ahead, it's 7:45 in one time zone, 5:45 in the other. That is one way a GMT works. And then you've seen me do the Red Star video. This one's got 2 separate dials. You can consider this a GMT watch as well. What both of these don't tell you is if it's AM, PM on the GMT hand, and that's usually denoted with a different kind of GMT, which I didn't bring to the party, but it points to a 24-hour scale, and it rotates once per day. This GMT hand rotates once every 12 hours, just like the normal GMT hand. Next complication. Let me find the watch. I don't know where. Here it is. Power reserve. Power reserve meter. Let it focus. So on this Seiko Presage, we've got a power reserve needle right here. It's on almost pointing to E. And then here's 40, it has about a 40-hour power reserve. So as I wear it or wind it, you'll see that needle moves. There's 10 hours of reserve, and coming up to 15 hours of reserve. There's 20, and that needle will tell me how much wind is left in the mainspring of the watch. So if I'm taking it off for the day and I'm putting it on the next day or whatever, I have an idea of how much is left before it's going to die if I need to give it a little bit of a wind. A tourbillon. I did a watch and learn on tourbillons. I think I used the same exact watch. Must have been, because I think it's the only kind I sell. A tourbillon is a watch where the entire escapement, which is this time, the heartbeat of the watch, this balance wheel going back and forth, which is the same as this balance going back and forth. But see, this balance going back and forth is not moving about its rotational, it's not translating or rotating about its rotational axis, it's just oscillating back and forth. Whereas this one, if you watch it, this balance wheel that's going back and forth is also turning clockwise off axis slightly, and that's to account for gravitational effects. It's more of a cool complication than anything else. Doesn't really increase the accuracy of the watch. It's just really, really nifty. That's a tourbillon. One other I want to go over, you might see it every now and again, is the retrograde indicator. So this date display on this Red Star dual time is a retrograde indicator. And that means that after it doesn't run in a full circle, after it runs to the end of its cycle, which is 31 days, the next click over will force the hand of the date to snap back to 1. So let's see if we can make that happen. Okay, so here we go. I'm advancing the time. It's on the 31st. We're going to pass through midnight soon. And it snapped right back to 1. Do you see that? That's called retrograde. Pretty cool. Don't have a lot of watches with it, but it's just a different way to display information. It allows them to put everything further apart without making it a full circle. So it kind of saves on dial room. The power reserve meter at the top, like any other power reserve, wouldn't really be considered a retrograde because it doesn't snap back once it reaches the end. It's literally just a meter. One other term I want to go over, which I don't own, and I'd love to own one day, would be a retropant. Retrograde is a split seconds chronograph. Much like the way I was able to hide this hour hand under this hour hand, a split seconds chrono actually has a Retrograde, or a split seconds chrono, actually has 2 seconds hands. So once you stop one, the second one comes out from underneath and keeps going. And that's the way you can measure, 2 different elapsed times, 2 people running a race, or 2 times around a track, whatever it may be. We know splits, split timing from digital watches, Timex, Casio. They obviously do splits rather well, but there is a way to do it mechanically, and it's pretty cool. Anyway, I think that's the last term I wanted to go over, and I think it gives you kind of a basic overview of most of the terms. Hopefully you'll learn something if you're kind of seasoned, and if you didn't, I hope you liked watching it. If you're a beginner, though, I think you definitely picked up some cool stuff. Anyway, it has been Mark from LongIslandWatch.com, showing you watch terminology. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. If you have any questions or comments, put them down below, and I will be sure to answer them as soon as I can. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.